My name is Geoff. Garmin name is Shōun. O'Keefe is my family name. And I grew up Roman Catholic, like I think more than a few people here might have. And so from 1959 to 1965, I went to Catholic school, and that included during the school year going to church 6 days a week. And so I'd get up in the dark and go to this Quonset type of a church because I grew up in the Manhattan Project kind of a place. And the pews were hard. It was cold. There was a scary guy with a shaved head with brightly colored robes chanting in a foreign language and burning incense. So there's, that didn't occur to me until about a year ago that there was that background. It's a bit comical for me, but who knows? Like a lot of us in the time, in the late 60s, I read Huston Smith, his book on world religions. I read Alan Watts and Paul Reps and Paramahansa Yogananda and some of those books. You get to 1970, and now we've got Zen Mind and Beginner's Mind and Be Here Now and the Three Pillars, and of course I read all of those. But I didn't have any in-person experience until fall of 1972, and I joined a yoga group in Bellingham, Washington, that was really the full complement of yoga, so it included meditation, but all the other forms as well. So for a year or so, I wore white clothes and fasted on the right day of the month, and sang and danced and did meditation and did physical yoga and had a mantra and all of those things. But no orientation to Zen whatsoever until 1975. And I went to the Zen Center of Los Angeles because I had been reading, and I knew that there was this place close by. I lived about an hour and a half away, and attended a full day seminar or introductory training, and was profoundly influenced by it. I met Maizumi Roshi and some of the other first generation successors at the time. Went back to Santa Barbara, and I really didn't know one kind of Zen from another. I didn't know what was what at all. But there was a Zen group in Santa Barbara, and it turns out it was related to a monastery in Mount Shasta, California, which is a different line. It's the line of G. Kennett Roshi, an Englishman. And I sat with that group for a couple of years. I went up there in 1978. I'd never sat longer than a day. And I signed up for a week-long sesshin, kind of just not knowing what I was doing. And it was a Jukai sesshin. And Shasta Abbey is quite monastic, a very strict monastic kind of place. And took the precepts there. I'll try to truncate this a little bit so I don't use up too much time. But this path already was really windy and unclear for me. I didn't know what I was doing, but something kept me going, and I couldn't put my finger on what that was. But something motivated me to keep going. There was quite a gap. I moved around a lot. From high school until now, I've lived in 45 places. So I was never anywhere long enough really to get established. And I lived in places where there was no practice, organized practice going on. So it was a number of years until 1984. And, by chance, a long other story that I won't go into, I started practicing again at the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And that spring in '84, with my wife and son, moved into the Zen Center of Los Angeles and lived there for 2 or 3 years and practiced. And that really had a huge influence on kind of stabilizing my practice. We moved again, moved to San Diego, and I practiced with Joko Beck for two or more years in Mission Beach. Moved some more, and there were big gaps where I really wasn't practicing. I wasn't sitting, at least. But I always had a thread of some sort. I always had an altar in my room, And I always had a place for myself, even if I didn't sit on it. And that was intentional. It wasn't just I needed a place to put this stuff. You know, in my heart or in my mind, it was a way to keep a thread to this practice that I really didn't know why I was doing it. Anyways, some more moving around. We ended up here 25 years ago, and I learned that Shishin Roshi was here. I'd practiced with Shishin Roshi before he was transmitted in LA. And it was really the first time that I had personal one-to-one relationship with somebody who was a teacher or beginning to be a teacher. And he was so easy to talk to. And so I took advantage of that and complained bitterly about my life because he would listen for a while. And he asked good questions. And I just fell in love with him. Then I learned that he was here after we moved here and got connected with Great Mountain Zen Center in Lafayette, where Kyoto Sensei was practicing. Maybe I'll leave it at that. Things have stabilized, settled down quite a lot since then. I haven't had year-long gaps like I used to have. I may still not have answered the question about why am I doing this, but I've stopped asking that question, and I'm just doing it now, and it feels good. So I'll leave it at that. I didn't time myself. Did I? Did I hog the clock?
Or neither.
Well, whichever one of you wants to go.
I didn't go looking for Zen at all. I would love to say that I was on this mission search, but it wasn't in my mind at all. I had taken some philosophy and some comparative religions in college that I liked. And of what we learned in those classes, Zen was the most interesting thing to me, but it seemed like cool books to read and fascinating ideas, but not anything to seek out. It literally never occurred to me. And it was years out of college. I was in a teaching job, and I became friends with one of the other staff at the school who was going to a monastery on weekends. And I was kind of just curious about where this guy sitting over here, what he was doing with his Sundays. And he invited me to join him. And it was really harsh, severe. The sitting was absolutely miserable. I did not like it at all. I liked the building, but the practice just seemed so severe. If somebody moved or shifted their seat or cleared their throat, somebody at the back end of the room would tell them to be quiet or sit still. So I sat there petrified and was so relieved at the end of the sitting periods. Oh, and then Kinhin just looked like the walking meditation was just these people rushing around, going nowhere, made no sense to me. I didn't feel connected at all. And then at the end of a couple of sitting periods, there was a Dharma talk. And it was this tough sounding Italian Jersey City guy, which I didn't quite get how that fit with the rest of it. And during his talk, I had no idea what he was talking about. I couldn't relate anything I was hearing to anything I could remember from Alan Watts or Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind that I had read 5 or 6 years earlier. But somehow woven into the talk, he started talking about photography. And photography was a big love of my life. And it turned out that he had apprenticed with my favorite photographer, with Minor White. And that kind of grabbed my attention. I thought that was cool. And he had mentioned through a workshop with Minor White, he was introduced to meditation, and that was the beginning of his practice. So I was kind of intrigued enough by the talk and by this person in the front of the room to go back a week or two later and set a couple of periods. Really disliked it a lot, but I wanted to hear another talk. And the talk this time, he didn't mention photography, which is a little disappointing at first, but then started talking about the diamond net of Indra and completely blew my mind. This holographic concept of the interconnectedness of the universe and how everything happening impacts everything else. And I didn't get what that had to do with just sitting really still, not making noise in long rows with a bunch of people in silence. But that they were both happening in the same room was enough to start getting curious and wanting to know what this was. And the more I sat, I don't think I'd say I liked it for the first 5 or 6 years at all, but grew a little more patient with myself and started sinking into it rather than trying to find mental activity to entertain myself while I just looked like I was sitting. And something started softening about the whole thing. And I started seeing that there was some connection between these talks and what I could be doing on the cushion. And I also started getting to know people in the Sangha at that time. And I started noticing that while there were always, anytime you have a group of people, there's stuff going on between them, but there was this patience and acceptance for each other, and that there wasn't a lot of drama, that people were willing to sit with challenges and difficulties. And it started sinking into me that this wasn't about just physically being still, but about being present and about self-reflection. And it honestly took me a couple of years to actually start doing the practice that I was pretending to be doing. And I don't know why it took that long, and other than I'm really stubborn and resistant to a lot of things. But I started really falling in love with being in this room and with this community and breathing. I started to really appreciate my breath and the breath of everyone around me, and feeling connected to each other and to the practice and to the Dharma. But it took a really long time, and I don't know why I felt like I needed to fight against it as much as I did, other than I am who I am. But it really took a long time for edges to start kind of softening into appreciating it. And by that time, I decided to become a student. And usually people do this in months. They sit a couple of times, they like it, they become a student. It took me 5 years to realize that this is really a practice that meant something to me, that I wanted to dedicate myself to, and I wanted it to work on me while I worked on me. And that I believed, I trusted in it. The more I started being able to grasp little bits of what was coming up in the talks, the more I observed how the Sangha interacted with each other as a whole unit, I started seeing myself as part of it. And when I became a student, I started having Dokusan. And I don't know how much of it was about Zen in particular and how much was about just what I was ready to work with in my own life. But I realized that this teacher that I randomly just happened to end up working with, because somebody from the school where I taught went there, happened to be the right person for me. And part of the reason was that he had a way of challenging me that I liked, that I wanted to rise to. And that he was also a lot like my dad, who I didn't have a good relationship with. They were about the same age. They grew up directly across the river from each other and gone to the same college for the same thing. They worked in the same field for years. And it was kind of like getting to meet a much saner, safer version of my dad and work through growing up, through a different parent and parenting myself. And I'm a little embarrassed about that part of it, but it was really valuable, because a lot of what was in fight or flight mode for years had to do with him, and learning how to sit and feel and observe instead of fight back was a really useful thing for me to learn, that made, I think, everything that came after it possible. So I fell in love with this, and I really would have liked to have stayed there. It was a monastic setting, and you were there. If you were there in residence, you were there full time. And while I went and spent a month at a time there, the idea of giving up my own place to live and my job and my cat and my houseplants, I could never see taking that kind of leap and being there full time for a year or longer. But there was a part of me that really wanted to. And then I ended up moving to Colorado for grad school and met Shishin Roshi, and actually met Kyoto Sensei my first day. He was one of the very first people I met in Boulder. We sat at Naropa as a group, and then a couple of us went to Trident for coffee after. And I went, oh, maybe it's not just this one monastery and this one teacher in New York, but it's actually the Dharma that I like, and that there's practice other places. And that was something that really took me years to sort through. I stayed a student in New York, went back for a session 3 or 4 times a year. Before Daido died, my teacher died, and I decided that I needed a teacher to work with on a weekly basis, and really wanted to be able to go in for Dokusan regularly, and I already loved this Sangha. So transitioning to practice here was great, or I thought it was going to be. And I asked Shishin Roshi if I could be his student. And it took me a few days to get up the nerve to ask. And he said, oh, well, we do that differently here, and it's not the big deal it is in New York where you come from. And because there's a guardian council and weeks of discernment and discussion and stuff that go on. I said, well, what do I do? And he goes, oh, you just did it. And I'm like, cool. And that was like my realizing I could move my spiritual home to live with the rest of my body and the rest of my life, and not feeling separated anymore, not feeling like part of me was living in the East Coast and part of me was living in the mountains. And it was really liberating, and I just fell in love with working with Shishin and then with Gyodo Sensei. But again, I don't make any of these choices or movements very fast. But I'm really happy to have landed here, and that it led to Eon Zen and sitting in a circle with all of you.
So my given name is Sam, and my Dharma name is Sokyo. And what a treat to sit here next to my Dharma brother and sister who I haven't seen in a while. Go down that path with you of how we ended up here, this crossroads. My experience, so I came to Zen much later in life than you all did. I started practicing more formally Zen when I was 45. And I also found out that Charlotte Joko Beck, who's been mentioned a couple times, one of the 12 successors of Maizumi Roshi, started practicing when she was 48. So I was much encouraged by that when I learned that it's never, ever too late. And my beginning of practicing formal Zen was with this group too. And I'll share a little bit of how I got there, but it was in a Monday night. So I have a real soft spot in my heart for the newcomer here, because it was this was the first group that I walked into on a Monday night, not knowing anybody or much about Zen at all, and was welcomed really warmly. So it's pretty cool to get to sit here today and share this. My path towards Zen started much earlier, but it wasn't in the form of Zen. I first learned about meditation and kind of began being curious about it when I was in my mid-20s. I came across a book called Mindfulness in Plain English that had been published in 1995. And I think I read it in 1996. It's by Bhante Gunaratana. And it just laid out the basics of not only meditation and practice, but also the hindrances that might come along with it. It's a really thorough, very plain English outline of dedicated practice, including the spiritual dimension. You know, what is it that we're practicing for? Different maybe than what we might think of as a mindfulness text now of, you know, get a little bit of stress relief. This was a real Dharma book in that it spoke to those deeper dimensions. And I remember having this feeling of like a bell going off. Like it just, like, I didn't understand it all. I certainly wasn't practicing it seriously, but I just felt this resonance, something resonating. And I remember having this very clear thought of, oh, this is going to save my life one day. Like it was that clear. I had that intuition. Didn't know what that was about. And it wasn't until years later that I started more dedicated practice. But I was so taken by this that I took, at the time I had an actual typewriter, and I typed out notes of meditation instruction and metta practice and all of this onto these kind of little index cards I had. And I still have that, which is really cool. So something shifted and started calling and opening. I meditated off and on, wasn't ready to start practicing seriously. But in my mid-30s, At that point in my life, and some of you know some of my story, I'd had a number of mental health crises by that point, pretty major ones, where I ended up being either in treatment or in a hospital. At the time, I was in my 30s, and I was a full-time tenure-track professor. And this happened again. My life really became very unmanageable, and I was hospitalized. A lot of this comes from in recovery from complex PTSD from some childhood experiences. At the time, I didn't understand what was happening. All I was experiencing was that my body was in full flight and fight mode. So I wasn't able to really be grounded and manage just being in the world. So I went on medical leave after that hospitalization, partly because I wasn't functioning yet. Like, I don't know if any of you, some of you maybe in the medical field are aware of like the global, what is it? It's the global access of functioning scale or something. And 100 is you're doing great. I was at like a 40 when I came out of the hospital. I was lower than that. So I wasn't able to return to teaching at the time. I was on a longer term medical leave. The psychiatrists were throwing a lot of different medications at me at the time to see if we could help my system to stabilize. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I was fortunate to have one psychiatrist who also practiced meditation. And so in our sessions, he would offer some guided meditation, and along with, there was prescriptions I was working with at the same time. But when I would do the meditation, my system would calm down and it would ground. And it was the most astounding thing. As soon as I came out of the meditation, it would all go haywire again. But it was proof that, oh, there's something here other than a bunch of medications, for me at least, that was making this more workable. I could be in my body with deep, concentrated meditation. So as my leave continued, I still wasn't really able to just kind of get back to things, because it was really only in deep meditation where everything felt grounded. So I'm still on leave, and I thought, well, I'm just going to sit in meditation all the time then. It works, and I feel great when I do it, and I'm present and I'm grounded. And so that's what I did. So I sat in meditation all day. When I got up to move, as soon as I felt my system start to get activated again, I would just stop, and I would just start walking very slowly, and it would calm down again. And then I would sit again. And I did this for a week. So unbeknownst to me, I did my first week-long session all by myself. And I learned Kinhin all by myself. And it worked. It was amazing. And 3 weeks later, I returned to campus. And that fall, I returned to teaching. And I did it with the support of pretty continuous, walking, meditation, mindfulness, and then practice sitting. During this time, I was also, because I was so fascinated with how it was functioning, I started reading a lot. And it was the Zen books that resonated for me. There was something to it, the directness of it. It was really helping to support what I was discovering on my own. So that was, I was 37 at the time. It was hard work teaching in that way. It required a lot of presence. I still wasn't to the level of functioning I wanted to be. So I took another leave in the spring, and that was when I moved to Boulder. Didn't know anybody here, but I knew I wanted to be somewhere where I could be with the earth and the sky. And I'd heard that there might be some spiritual practitioners here. So I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew it would be a good place to come and be. And I ended up staying. I didn't go back to my teaching position. I stayed here. It was another 7 years before I actually started practicing Zen. And in that time, I actually had another hospitalization and continued work and stepping into full recovery, to where I actually could dedicate myself more directly to practice and show up in Sangha. I tried out almost every spiritual group in town. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I wanted a sitting group. So in Boulder, it's like taking out Han groups, and there's Nalada Bodhi and Shambhala, and I think I went to every one of them. And then I went to a Monday night in December, it's the end of December 2015, I think. Maybe 2016. No, it was 2015. And the same thing happened that had happened when I read that book. I felt that bell. Something about this group, this teacher, these teachings felt right. And so I just kept sticking around, coming on Monday nights. I think by the end of the next year in 2016, at the time, pre-COVID, we would sit in Gakyo Sensei's home Zendo, which used to be a garage, and in the mornings as well as Mondays. So I started doing that and sat next to Shōun in the dark, a little group of usually like 6 to 7 of us. And it was really starting to take. At some point in that 2016 year, it's funny, I did a little prep for this because I was curious about that. Like, how did that stepping into it fully happen? And I look back at my emails, which I don't ever delete, and I have these early emails for like communication with Sensei about practice or meeting up and what time. And there was a period in there, to share this, where I stepped back. It's in my first year of practice, and you can see it in the emails because the way it shows up is Sensei reached out to me. I said, hey, I haven't seen you in the morning sitting in a while. Are you okay? And the email I shared back was that I had started to experience what I called flushing, where there was just a ton of energy in my body, and I actually couldn't sit upright for long. It was like you're having like a blood rush, blood pressure kind of dropping. So I went through a difficult time where I couldn't sit for long periods, and realized that at that time with the stabilization of my practice, I had a lot of energy in my body coming out from a lot of that trauma. And I was working through it therapeutically. I worked with a trauma therapist for a long time, but it became clear that that energy needed to move, and that actually sitting still would be counterproductive, be kind of freezing that energy. And I share this just because I think it's important to know, like, the wisdom of our body will show us the way. And so I spent a couple of months working through that energy and moving it. And then after I had been through that process, boom, I could just sit. It really cleared. That was a really important turning point for me. And I think it was a few months later, I attended my first Zazen Kai in February 2017. And then a few months later, a 2-day session out at GMZC, and then a week-long that June. And I haven't looked back since. It just was ready. Being part of the Sangha has been really important for me. It's part of my healing and growing up, of being able to be in real, authentic relationship with you. And then for those who don't know, I mean, also oddly, even as I say that, 2 years ago, I felt really called to go on a wandering retreat. And so I left the Sangha in physical form, but have maintained connection throughout. So I live in a hermitage on wheels. I'm back in town for a few weeks. And I get to be with you all and see what it's like to meet the world and kind of a retreat into the world and to see craving, aversion, all of it showing up in people and in myself in a very concentrated way in this form that I'm taking. Sickness, old age, and death everywhere. And a really powerful time. And the practice continues. So it's pretty cool to be back here and get to share where we're at this point. That's my path. Thank you.
Well, since I began, maybe I'll start. Question for Gakyo. as a, and please correct me, as a self-improvement program, has Zen cured that pescatarianism?
Ask my teacher. But I was out with my mom and one of her friends who had younger kids, and I was in my late 20s, and my mom's friend asked my mother when I got over that stubborn age, and my mother literally fell off the chair laughing. I don't think, I like to think my nature and everyone else's is fluid, but I think there's certain traits that are essential to us, and I think that's a piece of mine. But I think I respect it and have learned how to work with it a lot. And through practice, I can see when I'm digging my heels in and recognize when I have no reason to be doing that. And then you can, all of a sudden your hands just open and it flies out. I don't think I get quite as stuck on my own belief. I might fight somebody else who argue about anything and take any position that's oppositional for the hell of it at any time. But I don't think I get as attached to it. And I always see a lot more perspectives than I did in younger years. I'm going to be 63 in a couple of months, and I think I started practicing when I was about 30. And I think that's probably the biggest difference I see in myself is I can see more sides to any argument and respect and have compassion for other perspectives.
And just so we don't leave any confusion on the table, Zen is not a self-improvement program. We are focused. Happily so.
Well, I'll ask a question, kind of coming from some of what I shared. I would love to hear, and this could be for both of you, particular things within Zen practice, experience, that you just really struggled with. Whether that was a wall that you hit in something within you, or like with me, there was a dimension of really needing to learn how to work with my nervous system in my sitting. But is there a particular struggle that you saw yourself and how you maybe worked through that?
Good question. I guess at different times, everything can be a struggle. If I have some idealized expectation of what it should be like, whether that's simply a meditation period or bowing or chanting or walking meditation or washing the dishes meditation. But if I had to pick one thing, it would have to be going in for Dokusan, going in to see the teacher. Kyoto-sensei makes it a lot easier, mostly. But I've done that with Kyoto-sensei and with Shishin Roshi and Maizumi Roshi a few times back in LA a long time ago, and Bernie even in Shōun. But part of Geoff doesn't want to look stupid. Geoff wants to have the answer and to be the smart guy. And Dokusan will break you with that because you don't get to be the smart guy. And for the longest time, I think it's pretty well dissolved by now, but for the longest time, I would, the night before, I would sleep. Wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of running through a koan or something, or whatever it is. And it's just, my ego protections, knowing that I'm going to be seen. And that ego doesn't like that so much. Don't look at me. Look over there. This is a good story I'm going to tell you. It's really cool. Yeah, but don't look at me while I'm telling the story. And that kind of behavior gets cut off summarily. You asked the question, so what did I do with that? Just go. You just go. And you take all that anxiety and stuff and just bring it in.
Yeah, I think for me there was a time a bunch of really rough things happened. Just this confluence in a really short period of time. I had a friend with cancer. One of my coworkers at the school we used to be at together's sister's remains had been found in someone's house, along with a lot of other people's. And I got fired from a job all in a couple of weeks of each other. And I was just treading water. I was not remembering. I'd get in the car and not know where I was going. I realized that I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was just off. And I called the monastery and asked if I could come be there a couple of days. I didn't know what I thought I'd get out of being there, but it was a good instinct. And I was really rattled. And any of one of the things would have really rattled me, but all of them together was more than I knew what to do. And I remember sitting, there was a huge fireplace, it was a big old building, fireplace I could stand inside, and a little alcove that they usually kept firewood in. And I remember sitting in the alcove, curled up. And one of the monastics sat down near me and said, "Your practice can hold all of this." And that was just the words I needed. And that's kind of what I learned that it could. That that these teachings of this Dharma is bigger than I ever imagined, and that it can hold more garbage than I could possibly throw at it, and that I could learn how to swim in there and float and be with all of these things without pushing them away or blocking them, and just feel them and hang with it without creating storylines and narratives and explanations, but just be with it. And that was my first experience of that, and it was profound. It meant a lot to us.
You got a question?
I've got a question. Is there anything in particular a meditation teacher has ever said to either of you, to both of you, that really stuck? The teaching that was just the right teaching at the right moment that has remained really important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's one, to answer directly. which is also probably related. I'll just share a first thought, best thought. What came to me is a teaching once where early on, I think it was my first week-long session, and I was it was like day 6, and I was in very, very deep, 6 days of solid meditation, and pretty continuously, first time ever for me. And there were all kinds of things happening for me in that experience. My mind was pretty expanded. I wasn't sure what was going on with my body. None of that was really integrated yet in my practice. And I had heard this thing about drop-off body and mind. And it felt like I was going to just disappear, like just gone. It had that quality, partly because I wasn't integrated, and this was out at Great Mountain Zen Center, and it was Shishin Roshi that I had to talk with about what I was experiencing. And he said, "What do you think is going to happen?" And I said, I don't know, but it feels like I'm going to just disappear. And it's both like exhilarating and terrifying, and I don't quite know what's happening here because I hadn't experienced that level of meditation before, continuous sitting. He didn't hit me with a stick, the Zen stories, but he did. He did that on my knee, and he said, "Drop off body and mind doesn't mean that you disappear. It means you're so in your body that there is no body, no idea of body. You're so in your body." And it was a real turning point for me because then my attention and my awareness went right down into here from then on. And it also helped me at that time. He gave me some good instruction on how to integrate my breath and my body and my mind. So in introductory Zen classes that we teach, we often talk about body, breath, and mind. And the practice of actually integrating all of them into concentration meditation, I didn't have that piece yet at that point. I didn't even know what that meant. So there was some really good teaching then and guidance that, that's actually what we're doing, is we're concentrating all of these together so that then we can become more embodied, fully embodied. And that's really what the practice is about. Totally changed everything.
Quickly, keep an eye on the clock here, but just the ones that popped into my head right away. Shishin Roshi has said this to probably half the people in this room. Just keep going, which has remained some of the most profound teaching I've ever heard, and it comes up for me all the time. He also told me, "You're not that special," which others I'm sure have heard. And that's a good reminder from time to time. Yoda Sensei said, "Stillness answers every question." And I probably refer to that daily at some point during the day. Because, you've heard me talk about complexity making machine. That stillness, kind of interrupts the complexity making machine. Years ago, early 80s, my Zen Roshi, when I went to see him once, he said, "This is very simple. This is very simple." And I've never forgotten that. And there's probably so much more too, but those are all tricky. We should leave a little bit of time, and maybe we'll have a little bit of time to sit at the end as well. But if anyone else has a question, quick ones, a couple of quick ones, if you'd like. And if not, that's okay. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I can't see the screen.
Nick.
Hey, Nick.
I got one. Yeah, thanks for sharing all your stories. It's good to see you. Welcome back. So it sounded to me like it took all three of you a while before you really committed. And to me, I've been practicing for a few years and been interested in meditation for maybe 6 or 7 years now. And I find myself like saying, like, okay, like, harder, just more, just do it more. Just like, come on, get over yourself, just do it. And I know like it would be good if I just like try harder and spend more time doing it. But it doesn't really stick in that way. And so I wonder if you guys can speak to that moment when you hit like that inflection point of like, okay, I'm same thing, I'm just trying this out, it feels good. Into like, okay, no, I'm doing it. I'm really like committed now wholeheartedly. And was that something that unfolded organically? Or was it something that like you kind of like talked yourself into it? Yes, maybe you can speak to that briefly.
For me, I think an injury made a big difference. I got injured at work, and I have, depending on who's reading the x-ray, either 3 or 4 herniated discs in my neck. And I couldn't go to the monastery where I was practicing for a while. I couldn't sit at all. I had months of laying on my back with my feet up a wall. And when I was able to go back and sit, and part of it was that my practice was already kind of starting to gel a little before this happened, so I missed it. When I was actually able to sit on a zafu in a zendo again, it made me so happy that I never wanted to miss a day of practicing again after that, once I physically could do it again, because it was a long haul to get upright and be able to turn my head enough to drive and be able to go anywhere. But I realized that was really where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing with my body. So I think that was a lot of it.
I'll say, at least my experience, I have come to see that entire lead-up time as all the practice. Like, I believe I was on the path when I heard that bell when I was 26 years old. I just didn't know it. And all of that time, preparatory, whatever, that lead into the full all-in, is all part of the all-in. The threshold is that long. So there's like this ripening that's already initiated through all of that. What is it that tips us over? That is unique for each person. For me, at that point, I had been through so much suffering. There was a degree of surrender I had experienced in my life pre-Zen, through recovery, through the different things I was going through, that I believe I was already practicing all in. I just didn't know it. I didn't call it that. And then for me, at least, I was looking for something to make sense of that. And as soon as I started hearing the Buddhist teachings, they were confirming what I was already feeling. Oh yeah, I get letting go. I get that. And here's a place that actually talks about that directly. So it was more like looking for a thing that would match. And once I found it, I was like, oh, that's it. The square peg and the square person don't fit. But the details are different for everybody. But I believe the lead up is already the path.
That confirmation piece is really familiar to me. Who doesn't? I guess learning something new. I was hearing from somewhere else something I already knew inside. Yeah.
I'll just say just for a minute, I totally agree with what Sokyo said, is that confusing time where you're not sure what you're doing and you're not sure if you're doing it right is it. It's essential. And for me, out of 50 plus years, it was the first 30 that was like that. And it wasn't really until 20 years ago or 18 years ago or so that that it really just kind of started to sink. And what happened was And my friend Eve Marco, I don't know if Eve Marco says this, and you said, try harder, Nick. So I was trying really hard, holding my practice like this. And Eve would say, hold it like that. Still try. And that's a metaphor, of course, for what it felt like. That's what it began to feel like. It was just becoming part of my life. Just a quick one, and then thanks. If there's another one.
Quick one.
We good?
Yeah. I'm really curious what daily practice looks like.
What daily practice?
Yeah. Like, do you meditate daily or not? Or like,
Do you what?
do you meditate daily or not? Or
I'll answer this really quickly. Most mornings I'd sit with Eon Zen Senior for an hour and 20 minutes or so. Get up, get a cup of coffee, and then sit with Zen peacemakers for about an hour. And then half an hour settings in the mornings. Most of the time, and that's just kind of my default thing. And I'll miss those every once in a while. If I have a bad night's sleep or sick or something like that.
and then sleep retreats.
What's that?
And then retreats.
And
Oh,
the
it's
retreats.
yes, daily.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the retreat once a month. So
I do sit every morning, and a lot of times before bed too, or toward the end of the day. But something that I like doing was kind of making other things that aren't normally in practice that mindful. And I'll go through months where like the feeding the cat practice is everything that you put into zazen, and all that energy goes into really seeing and feeling and hearing and connecting to the cat and the smell of the food and the scooping of the food into the bowl and putting it down as offering, and making some little piece of everyday life and practice. And it shifts around when it is, and sometimes it's art, and sometimes it's getting in the car when I leave the house. But finding something and deciding this is going to be attended to with the concentration and respect and the giving it everything of that happens on the zazen.
So my practice, when I was here in Boulder, I was on the same schedule, sitting with Eon every morning for 2 periods. And then we used to have evening sitting, which we don't do currently, but it's been different on my travels. So I allow myself to step out of the fixed schedule to just allow for whatever may be arising each day, which has proven to be very wise, because there are all kinds of things that arise that are completely unpredictable. Both with where I am and who I might be camped with, and but I sit every day in some form. It's just really flexible when that happens, which is kind of cool. And that said, my experience, because I'd say probably 3/4 of my time on the road, I'm in solitude, and the experience I have, especially when I come back into the cities and with other people, is like I've been on one continuous session, because I'm in silence pretty much all the time. It's me and my cats. I didn't realize how much I talked to them. I talked to them a lot, and actually just this spring I started doing an even more dedicated practice of being in silence with them, because they express themselves, vocally, but not often. And I thought, well, they don't feel the need to talk all the time. So I've been in even deeper silence in solitude. And that experience, as anyone who's done a retreat knows, like there are things that happen when you're not vocalizing all the time. So that awareness practice of just being really present with what's happening, because I'm not distracting myself with words, has been very powerful.
thanks for your question. Thanks for your answer.
Since I have a question.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a quick question, and you all are in charge of whether it's a quick answer. I'll do my part. From your current perspective, is looking back on your practice paths, is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
Oh, I guess I'll go. I don't have an answer, so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. And I hope this isn't a snarky answer, but I do try to practice not rethinking my life. You know, I've tried to train myself to do that because it could be a habit for sure. So, you know, my first answer would be no. But then if I wanted to search for one, I might wish that I had stitched those gaps together better and maintained more continuity during those periods of time that could have been 6 months or 5 years, you know, where I stopped altogether. Yeah.
I wish I had started practicing more earnestly sooner because I had everything I needed to do it. It was there. I had the Sangha, I had the time, I had the interest, I had the teacher, and the resistance was pretty pointless. So I would have liked to have gone deeper sooner and not had to wait until I was recovering from an injury to realize that.
Yeah, that's what came to me right away. Start sooner. If I could tell that 26-year-old, 32-year-old, 27-year-old, the gifts that were waiting, just waiting. Yeah, it would have been nice.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, everybody. I hope this was of some value to you.